Welcome back to This Week. Time now to get the views of our media and political experts, MMA Creative Vice President and Democratic Operative Mike Kopp, and syndicated talk show host Steve Gill. Welcome, gentlemen. We should note, too, because of our taping schedule Friday afternoon, the inauguration of Governor Bill Haslam has not yet happened, so we're not having a lot of discussion about that. Next week we'll hear from the governor and talk a little bit more about it. But I can't pat ourselves on the back a little bit. We're kind of ahead of the conversation. We've talked about symbolism in politics for a while on this show. With that in mind, it's clear there is no proof any kind of political rhetoric led to the shooting in Arizona. There's also no proof that it didn't. This guy seems to be just a nut job and is catatonic. He's not talking. Based on that, can we agree that both sides have maybe used symbols they wish they hadn't, crosshairs, don't retreat, reload, the president saying if they bring a knife, we bring a gun? Can we have separation of ideas without maybe those kinds of symbols?
I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I think that part of what you do in a political discourse is you have to speak in terms that people understand, that have a communication of visual as well as what you're trying to communicate in terms of the policy issue. But I don't think we can point to very many people who've said, go out there and kill the other side.
Right.
Now, you do have Democrat Congressman Paul Konjarsky in Pennsylvania, who on October 23rd told an audience in Pennsylvania, the folks in Florida ought to take Rick Scott, the Republican candidate for governor, and shoot him. Put him up against a wall and
that's
shoot
wrong.
him.
And
that's the most vitriolic thing I've heard, and nobody has condemned that.
Well, and I think and on the other side, you have Sarah Palin, who had the congresswoman's face with the crosshairs. And even though she went on and said she didn't believe she participated in any kind of inciting anything, she did take it off her website. So obviously somebody within her camp thought maybe she had crossed the line. And I agree with you, and I agree with Steve. I think both sides need to back off this sort of thing.
Well, and the president himself said, look, that's not what did this. The problem is you've had the leftist media for a week now make it seem like this guy was listening to Rush Limbaugh, grabbed his gun, went out and shot this congresswoman. That is not in the realm of the possibility of what happened. That is a lie, and Sarah Palin's use of the term blood libel is not an affront to the Jews, unless, of course, you're trapped in the Middle Ages when that's what it meant then. It is a term to show just the most vitriolic hate speech. That is what this has been. It has been directed at her, and it has been completely unfair.
Here's what we need to do, though. To pick up on what you said, though, Bob, we need to have both sides, including the Republican Party, step back and talk about whether or not we need to be looking at these gun issues right now. We need to talk about whether or not, we need to analyze whether or not some of the gun laws allowed this crazy nutcase to get access to weapons and ammo that maybe he shouldn't have if the laws had been changed. Right. This is an opportunity for both sides, Republicans and Democrats, to step back and look at policy and laws and see whether or not we need to think differently about what we've set up.
But the knee-jerk reaction of members of Congress saying we need to silence speech that isn't, quote, government approved is so far out of bounds it hurts. They're talking about putting a plexiglass room around the Congress and the U.S. Capitol. You've got folks talking about putting in gun bans and gun restrictions. This guy was not taken into any custody, had not been arrested, because maybe the sheriff in that community didn't do his job when this guy was, according to the sheriff, making threats at people. If somebody had arrested him, the gun laws as they exist would have kept him from doing this. If the mental health authorities had been called when he was kicked out of Pima County Community College for being mentally ill, he wouldn't have been able to get a gun. The gun laws are there, but they don't apply if the rules haven't been followed.
There was a failure in the system, no doubt about it. But also, he would not have had the clip, which carries 33 bullets, had it not been taken out of the law 4 years ago. It was a banned piece of equipment 4 years ago.
Exactly. This is a golden opportunity for the NRA, who's remained incredibly silent this week, to step up and talk about, gun safety, to talk about take a position on this thing, talk about the laws, talk about the policies, defend their gun policies. Instead, we see groups like the NRA that work behind the scenes with the Republican Party to change the law, and when something like this happens, they run and duck for cover.
But it's kind of interesting that in a place that we've been told in Arizona is the most gun-free, gun-promoting place in America, there wasn't a single person apparently in that entire crowd who had a gun to shoot back at this guy. So I think all this talk about guns is, again, as bad a smear campaign as what we've seen blaming talk radio, Rush Limbaugh, Sarah Palin, the Tea Party, without a shred of evidence. There was no indication that this guy would have been caught up in any kind of legitimate gun rule other than if he'd been arrested, like he should have been, or been put into a mental health institution, like he should have been, if the federal authorities, the state authorities have been doing their job.
I haven't seen all the coverage. I've seen a lot of it. I haven't, and I don't disagree with what you're saying. But the initial allegation comes from a sheriff, an elected official, that this may have contributed to this. So we have to cover that. How do we not cover that? At least put his views out there and then let people dissect them and say, no, this is wrong. But that's where it began.
Well, he's a Democrat Party hack.
Okay.
So, I mean, the fact that he's a
that's your
Democrat,
opinion, but yes.
well, he's a Democrat Party activist who, by his own
official.
announcement, was working in the campaign to re-elect Gabby Giffords. You've got a state senator in Arizona who was her friend, who immediately after the shooting was claiming that the shooter was an Afghan war veteran and that it was the Tea Party's fault. None of that, of course, was true. And then you had the media. You had CNN, you had MSNBC affirmatively saying this is because of the Tea Party. This is Rush Limbaugh's fault. You've had plenty of the media jumping in, even after they knew the facts.
Again, I haven't seen it all. I don't disagree. I've seen the coverage. It goes back and forth. But I guess the question again remains, here we are a week almost after this event happens, and really nothing has been solved. The arguments continues. There's been no give on either side regarding this. One side still says you're responsible. The other side says no, we're not.
The guy was crazy. His
he was.
closest friends said he was
no
a
doubt
liberal,
about that.
atheist, pothead smoking. That's not exactly Tea Party fare.
No, but this is an opportunity, and we should, frankly, use this opportunity to let the law enforcement officials, whether you think they're a Democratic operative or not, he's still the sheriff in that county. Let these law enforcement officials give them a bully pulpit to talk about maybe what we need to be doing to control this kind of violence. Instead, we want to push them off to the side, put a political label on them, and say, you're in law enforcement, forget it, your opinion doesn't matter. And I think to politicize this is just as bad as what we're doing on both sides.
Isn't it interesting, though, that the same commentary that you're making, Mike, is not afforded to Sheriff Joe Arpaio in Phoenix, who is a conservative, who cracks down on illegal immigrants, who cracks down on lawbreakers in Phoenix. We're not told we need to listen to Sheriff Joe Arpaio because he's elected official. You've got another sheriff right there on the county who's been speaking up about the illegals who are coming across the border in Arizona. If we're going to give deference to law enforcement officials, let's give deference to them on both sides of the aisle.
Here's an opportunity for Governor Jan Brewer, who's taken a really strong stance against the Hispanic community and the immigrant community in her state. Where has she been this week on acknowledging the heroic efforts of the gay Hispanic intern who held Congressman Gifford in his arms and stopped the bleeding and saved her life? This is a wonderful opportunity for her to step forward and acknowledge that someone in the Hispanic community stepped up and did something heroic. She's refused to do that. Is she contributing to this political rhetoric that's going back and forth?
I don't know that she's refused to do it. At the memorial service that turned into a pep rally with President Barack Obama, she was there. She talked about faith and prayer. I don't know that she's not said anything about Latinos and Hispanics. I do know that one of the columnists, I think it was for Salon, a Latino-Hispanic woman named Hernandez, wrote that she was so happy it was a white guy instead of a Hispanic named Hernandez or Gonzalez or Garcia. I think that's the kind of racism we also ought to be targeting. How could anybody say, I'm glad it's them instead of one of us in this kind of tragedy?
Because the point she was trying to make is if it was a Hispanic surname in that particular state under that sort of political environment, we wouldn't be talking about the kinds of things we need to be talking about, which is drilling down, getting the discourse more civil. Instead, we'd be talking about immigration.
We wouldn't be talking about motivation at all if it had been a Muslim man, and we saw that in Fort Head, Texas, where the media bent over backwards not to identify Major Malik Nidal Hassan as a Muslim. If this guy had been a Muslim, we never would have heard any conversation about his motivation.
Continue. Appreciate your insight. Steve Gill, Mike Kopp, appreciate it. Stay with us. This week continues in a moment.